to welcome Dr. Liz Lageson to our conference. I know all of you will leave today feeling excited about the important work she is conducting with the PEERS program for adolescents with autism spectrum disorder at the UCLA Semel Institute for Neuroscience and Human Behavior, where she is a licensed clinical psychologist and a clinical instructor in the Department of Psychiatry and Biobehavioral Sciences. Dr. Lageson is also the director of the UCLA PEERS program and the director of the health group UCLA Autism Research Alliance. And she's been a principal investigator and a collaborator on a number of NIH and CDC-funded studies investigating the effectiveness of social skills for training for children with autism spectrum disorders, mental retardation, fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, and for ADHD. As you can see, she is very much an expert on social skills and disability. Dr. Lageson was a two-time recipient of the Ruth L. Kirchton Postdoctoral Research Fellowship at the UCLA Semel Institute from 2004 to 2007, and she joined UCLA faculty in 2007. But little did you know that we have a celebrity in our midst, actually, as her pioneering work has been presented at various national and international conferences, in addition to recently being featured in media outlets such as People Magazine, the LA Times, New York Times, Washington Post, CBS, and NBC, just to name a few. I have to admit that Dr. Glazier and I, some of you might be familiar with her as faculty in our special department, both read about her article in People Magazine, and we stole the magazine from the doctor's office, so if you see Dr. Henderson, shh. But I don't want you to be too intimidated by her impressive credentials, as I recently learned that she is an unabashed reality TV watcher. I think many of us can probably relate to that in this room. On a personal note, I can attest to Dr. Lageson's passion and her heart for equipping socially challenged students with friendship skills. Not only did I receive her mentorship during my doctoral training, but I recently became certified in the PEERS program that you are going to learn about today, and I can personally tell you that it is amazing. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Elizabeth Lageson.
Thank you, Erica, for that very nice introduction. I can't say I've ever been introduced and outed for my reality TV watching. That was fun and true. I am. I'm very addicted to those reality TV shows. And I watch the bottom of the barrel reality TV shows. I think I've seen every episode of Jersey Shore. But the nice thing is that when you work with adolescents, you can blame them for your bad TV watching and just say that you're doing research. You're just trying to keep up on what the kids are doing, and it's all good. Anyway, as interesting as it would be to talk about Jersey Shore and reality TV show, that's actually not why I'm here today. I'm here to talk a little bit about an evidence-based social skills program for teenagers with autism spectrum disorders, and that program is called PEERS. Just to give you kind of an overview of what I was hoping to talk about this morning, I wanted to begin with just speaking a little bit about what some of the social deficits are that you see with kids with autism spectrum disorders. I'm going to talk about the importance of improving friendship skills and social skills. I'll mention briefly what some of the current limitations are for existing social skills programs, and then I'll give you an overview of PEERS, which is a parent-assisted social skills intervention program. We also have developed it for the classroom. That's where it's teacher-facilitated. I'll give you a little glimpse of some of the skills that we teach in PEERS, so you can all go back and kind of have little tools in your toolbox in terms of how to teach appropriate social skills, and then I'll give you a little summary of some of our research findings. Before I get started, though, just to kind of poll the audience. So most of you are educators, is that right? So by show of hands, how many of you are educators? Okay, almost all of you. Okay, how many of you are parents or family members of people on the autism spectrum? Okay, and also of those of you who are here, how many of you work with adolescents with autism spectrum disorders? Okay, so maybe like a quarter of you. Okay, that's helpful, thank you. All right, well, in terms of what some of these social deficits are that we see, this is probably not news to all of you, but when we're looking at adolescents in particular, they have some very specific social skill deficits, and one really relates to poor social communication. Not surprising, this is one of the hallmark features of autism, but this becomes a big problem when we reach adolescence for our kids, because what are younger kids doing, elementary school age kids doing, when they're socially interacting with their peers? they're playing, right? They're playing, so we need to make sure that they know how to have good play skills, they need to know how to enter play appropriately, be good sports. But what do teenagers do when they're socially interacting? They're talking, right? So what you hear from a lot of parents and teachers are that some of their kids that are on the autism spectrum, maybe they were doing okay socially when they were in elementary school, and then they get to middle school and all of a sudden things change. And they don't want to leave their room, they only want to play video games, they don't want to have anything to do with anything, they don't have any friends anymore. This is a very common theme. And one of the things that if you step back and look, you know, the social demands changed pretty dramatically when they went from elementary to middle school. So social communication, big problem for a lot of our kids. This plays out in many different ways. Our kids have typically or very often this kind of pedantic style of speaking. Some of them are even described by their parents or their teachers as sort of sounding robotic, almost like a computer. And that can be very jarring. And actually, it's very important when you're thinking about that communication style, that pedantic style of speaking, when you're thinking about who this child, this teen, may eventually become friends with. Because how do the other kids relate to this teen who speaks like a robot? Are they going to think that they're normal? Are they going to find that a little bit unusual? In fact, a lot of neurotypical kids will even think that our kid on the autism spectrum, who may be incredibly bright but talks in this pedantic style of speaking, is maybe even intellectually challenged because they have this odd presentation. So when you're thinking about whether or not this teen is what we call sort of socially mainstreamable, in other words, they can hang out with other neurotypical kids and be accepted as a friend, this pedantic style of speaking actually comes into play quite a bit. We also know that our kids are very highly verbose very often, although some don't talk a whole lot, but many also are very highly verbose. Our teens have a lot of difficulty with topic initiation, so just thinking about what to talk about. And what do they typically talk about? What they're interested in, their restricted interests, and they have a lot of difficulty kind of changing those topics. They tend to have very one-sided conversations, okay? And you kind of laugh because you know what I'm talking about. So they're either sort of talking at you, kind of monologuing, what we call sort of being a conversation hog, or they're maybe asking a lot of questions, like question after question after question, and they're being what we call an interviewer. The problem is both of those styles, that's a one-way conversation. And what you're failing to do is trade information back and forth with the goal of finding common interests. And why would common interests be so important? Well, we know that that is the foundation of a friendship, having common interests. And so if our kids are failing to identify common interests, it's going to be very difficult for them to make friends. Okay, our kids also use these very repetitive themes when conversing, often perseverating on their restricted interests, with very little regard or even notice of the other person's interest, whether or not they're actually engaged and interested in the conversation. Our kids get stuck in a lot of irrelevant details when they're conversing. They make a lot of unexpected leaps in topics. And I think of this as almost getting lost in the conversation. Where do you think our kids typically leap back to? Back to their restricted interests. It's very interesting. You see these big leaps, but they're usually leaping back to their restricted interests. I see that as getting lost in the conversation, not knowing what to talk about, having trouble with topic initiation and segues and conversations. They leap back to what they know. Makes sense. And then we also know that our kids have a lot of difficulty interpreting verbal and nonverbal social cues. So things like voice tones, sarcasm, gestures even. This is fascinating. So in our groups, most of our kids, they play a lot of video games. They'll spend 6 hours or more sometimes a day playing video games. Okay, so video games, common interests that many of them share. They'll maybe be having conversations with each other with the goal of finding a common interest. They find that they have this interest in video games, and then I ask them, what could you do with that information if you were ever to hang out with this person? And they don't know what to do with that information, shockingly. So I try to prompt them, but not even verbally. I'll do a little gesture. I'll go like this. Well, we know that you both like video games, and I'll be doing this. What is this gesture? I'm playing with the controller, right? I'm playing video games. Do you think our kids get that? They don't, shockingly. No, so they have a lot of trouble with gestures, with the voice tone, sarcasm, and also things like social touch. So that's just sort of in the social communication domain. Our kids also struggle a lot with social awareness. So that would be just things like having poor eye contact, not picking up on social cues, And also just kind of understanding the landscape of a typical high school or middle school. They may be able to tell you what all of the different peer groups are in a typical middle school or high school. Like you've got the jocks, and you've got the popular kids, and you've got the geeks and the nerds and all these different groups. They might be able to identify those groups, but they couldn't tell you what the function of those groups are and why those groups are important. So understanding the social landscape, very, very difficult. They really struggle with social kind of awareness. Our kids also struggle with social motivation very often. They have less involvement in extracurricular activities, in clubs and sports. What would be the problem with this if you're trying to make friends? That's where your friends are. Your potential friends are doing these extracurricular activities and clubs and sports. But our kids tend not to be involved in those activities. And when they are, it's usually that their parents have enrolled them, but they're enrolling them in karate, let's say, and the kid's not interested in karate. But why do you think the parent enrolled them in karate? Self-defense, right? But that's not necessarily where they're going to make friends. They might learn how to defend themselves. But if our kids are actually interested in things like computers, what would be a good extracurricular activity for them? Yeah, like a computer class or those computer clubs. Many of our kids are into video games, a gaming club. So these are the kinds of things that we have to teach parents to help identify in terms of extracurricular activities for their kids. We also know that our kids have a lack of what we call peer entry attempts. They're not necessarily going up and joining conversations naturally. Or if they are joining these conversations, they may be doing it very intrusively. And how do you imagine that they would walk up to that person? They'd see people in conversation, they'd walk up, and what would they start talking about? Their interests, right? Which is probably going to be completely off topic. And do you think that group of people are going to want to talk to them? Probably not. So a lot of peer entry difficulties. We also know that our kids struggle with poor social cognition. This is not a surprise. Again, this is a hallmark feature of autism. This is poor theory of mind. Having difficulty putting yourself in the shoes of someone else, understanding the perspectives of others, and even in some cases maybe lacking empathy. Although the lacking empathy really does tend to relate more to cognitive empathy versus affective empathy. It's not that they don't feel things when other people may be experiencing emotions, it's that they have trouble labeling what those feelings are or describing those feelings, understanding what those emotions mean. Not surprisingly, with all of these social deficits, our kids really often have difficulty with friendships, and the friendships that they do have typically tend to focus on restricted interests. What I'm going to argue here today, though, is that that's actually okay. It's okay that friendships are based on restricted interests. We know that most friendships are based on common interests, so if they happen to be restricted interests, that's going to be okay. We just need to be able to converse and interact with people and talk about other things than video games. Okay? All right, so what are the results of some of these social deficits? Well, we know that a lot of our kids on the spectrum, they experience tremendous peer rejection. So that would be things like teasing and bullying, having a bad reputation. Now that's very, very different from a kid who is socially neglected. Very important when you think about kids who present for social skills treatment, kids who are struggling socially. There's kind of this continuum. And you've got the kids who are rejected. Okay, so these are kids who are being teased, bullied, they have bad reputations. And then you've got the kids on the other side that are socially neglected. These are the kids who are isolated, withdrawn, they're often seen as very shy, and they're not interacting socially. So they're very different in their presentation, and yet both have social skills deficits. But it's very important to think about that when you are intervening with them. Is this a kid that maybe has a lot of anxiety, and that's why they're kind of socially isolated? Or is this a kid who's incredibly intrusive and impulsive, and is barging into conversations and maybe being obnoxious, and trying to tell jokes all the time, but nobody else is laughing? Those are the kids who are peer rejected, so think about that when you're intervening. Another thing that we know about our kids is they experience a lot of peer conflict. So they get into, for example, arguments with friends. And arguments with friends happen. This is not that atypical. But what do you think happens as a result of these arguments for our kids in the spectrum? Poor problem-solving skills, and a lot of times these relationships are terminated. Okay, it's very black and white, concrete thinking. You're either my friend or you're not my friend. If we're in an argument, then we're not friends anymore. Okay, and that's very, very common as they terminate friendships around this peer conflict. So of course we have to give them strategies for how to problem solve these conflicts. We know they're going to come up. Unfortunately, a result of all of these social deficits is really that our kids struggle with friendships. They really have a lack of close, reciprocal, meaningful friendships. And in fact, when you actually look at friendship quality, there's a great study that was done back in 2000, actually, by Connie Kazari and Nurit Walminger. And this was the first study that actually looked at friendship quality in kids with autism. And it seemed pretty clear going into it that they were going to find deficits in friendship quality. I don't think that that was a huge shock. They found that these kids had less companionship, they had less help from their friends, less security, in general, just overall poor friendship quality. That wasn't what was so interesting about the study, even though no one had actually found that before. What I think was very interesting about the study was that up until this point, there was a bit of a misconception amongst parents, educators, therapists, that people on the autism spectrum were sort of asocial, that they weren't really interested in being social and having friends, that they would rather be alone. That was a big misconception. You might all remember that back in the 90s. That was very, very commonly, that's what the school of thought was. But what this study showed was that that wasn't actually the case for most of these kids. Most of them wanted to have friends. They just didn't know how to. Okay, and actually they experienced tremendous loneliness. And this was sort of an epiphany in the field, even amongst parents. It wasn't something that they necessarily talked about. Remember, our kids on the spectrum, they struggle with talking about emotions and talking about, labeling feelings. And so this wasn't a conversation that maybe was had that often. But this research actually showed that not only did our kids have poor friendship quality, but they also experienced tremendous loneliness. So why target friendships? Well, in peers, that's what we're really doing. Social skills is very broad. It can include anything from friendship skills to, elevator etiquette. And so what we do is we really focus on friendship skills. And we know that having one or two close friendships is really, really important and actually predicts adjustment in later life. We know that having one or two close friends can buffer the impact of stressful life events. For anyone who's been trained on crisis counseling, suicide prevention, one of the things that you assess for is social support. And why is that? Because we know having social support can actually help us in those times of crisis. We also know that having one or two close friends really predicts things like self-esteem. You feel better about yourself if you have a few close friends. It also increases independence. Why is this important for our kids? Well, we know that they tend to be very dependent on their family and their small social support network. And so by increasing their social skills and helping them to develop a few close friendships, we're also going to increase their independence. And then finally, we know that having one or two close friends really also correlates negatively with things like depression and anxiety. You're less likely to be depressed and anxious if you have a few close friends. On the other hand, peer rejection is actually one of the strongest predictors of later mental health problems. And this is not just for kids on the spectrum. So as educators, think about this. This is really, really important. If you want to predict who in your classroom is going to have a mental health problem later in life, look at the kids who are rejected. Those are the kids. It's one of the strongest predictors of later mental health problems. It also predicts things like juvenile delinquency and early withdrawal from school. All right, so not surprisingly, social skills training has been a pretty common method of intervention for kids on the autism spectrum. But the problem is that there's a lot of limitations with these kinds of programs. And if you look at the literature, what we find is that most social skills programs, they're failing to do a number of things. They don't necessarily assess what we call treatment outcome. So they're not actually checking in to see if what they're doing is working. You give a little pre-test and a post-test, and you do these different things to see is what you're doing actually effective. And most programs are unfortunately not doing that. They're also not necessarily tailoring the teaching methods to what the shared deficits are. So for example, we know kids on the spectrum, they think in very concrete and literal terms, right? Okay, so black and white thinking. Do you think that we want to use things like metaphors and figurative use of language and analogies with kids with autism? Should we use abstract kind of thinking? And no, we absolutely cannot do that with our kids because it's going to go right over their head. Instead, we want to use very concrete rules and steps of social etiquette, or whatever it is that you happen to be teaching. Concrete rules and steps, very important. That they can get. And then from there, you demonstrate what this looks like, give them a chance to practice this. It's all very formulaic. We know this is how they learn. This is their learning style. we need to tailor our teaching methods to their shared kind of deficits and strengths. Okay, we also know that a lot of these programs, they're failing to teach what we call ecologically valid skills. This is one of my biggest pet peeves. What that means is they're not teaching what kids who are socially accepted do, they're teaching what we think they should do. And I'm going to give you some examples of this in a little bit, but very, very big pet peeve of mine, because again, there's literature out there, there's evidence that shows this is what socially accepted kids do. That's what we should be teaching. We shouldn't be teaching them what we think that they should do, but what actually works. All right, we also know that a lot of these programs, they fail to generalize skills to other settings. So one of the things that we heard in Dr. Laura Hall's presentation this morning is the importance of generalizing skills to other settings. It doesn't really matter if your kids are, practicing the social skills that you're teaching them right there in that group with you. What really matters is, are they using those skills outside of the group? Okay, when you're not there. That's important. That's generalizing skills, and most programs aren't doing that. I think one of the reasons that they're not generalizing these skills is they're not giving homework assignments. Could you imagine trying to teach math and not give math assignments? Are they going to really learn as much? Probably not. In this case, generalizing the social skills, you get homework assignments where they're supposed to practice these skills outside of your class, then you have a chance that maybe they will actually generalize the skills. Another very important part of this is the parent component. Most social skills programs, the vast majority, do not include parents or teachers in the intervention. Well, what's the problem with this? Who's going to reinforce this behavior? I see the kids for maybe an hour, hour and a half a week, once a week for 14 weeks. That is very, very little time in the grand scheme of things, whereas teachers and parents, you guys are there the vast majority of the time in a natural setting. Why am I not teaching you to be social coaches to these kids and actually reinforce these behaviors? But the vast majority of these programs do not do that. Okay, they also don't, when they're doing research around these programs, they're not using things like randomized controlled trials, which is a very important kind of design. They're not using independent raters. So in other words, they're not polling teachers, or they're not taking behavioral observations, and they're not making sure, just you need to check that these skills are actually being used in multiple settings. And then we also are not assessing stability of all of these kind of gains, all of these improvements over time. Okay, that's very important. You actually want to know, does this intervention not only work when you're ending the intervention at the very kind of that post-testing period, but does it continue on months to years later? That's a very important question that we failed to answer. All right, so we know that in terms of treatment research for kids on the autism spectrum, lots of treatment out there, but not a lot of treatment research with this particular population. And most intervention studies that have existed up until this point have really focused on younger children. And why do we think that is? Yeah. So right, we know a lot about early intervention. We've heard a lot about the benefits of early intervention. We know social skills start to develop early on. So we've learned that we need to intervene at an early age. But remember, I talked about those changes and social demands. What happens when our kids reach adolescence? The social skills that they maybe learned in preschool or elementary school, which were very important and hopefully served them well, those change. And we need to be providing these kinds of interventions throughout life, really, not just adolescence, but also into adulthood. So unfortunately, most of the treatment research in this area is really focused on younger children with very little regard for adolescents and young adults. Another big problem with this kind of treatment research is that these studies have very, very small sample sizes, usually 6 or 7 kids in a study. What would be the problem with this? It's not reflective of the population. You can't generalize those findings to a larger population if you're only looking at 6 or 7 kids. So these are some of the problems with social skills treatment research. All right, so this really led us to develop the PEERS program. We saw all of these gaps in treatment and in research for adolescents with autism. And so about 7 years ago, Dr. Fred Frankel and I developed this program because we wanted to kind of fill that gap and actually develop an evidence-based program for high-functioning kids on the autism spectrum. We felt like that was a group of kids that was really being kind of largely ignored. And so what we did was we developed this manualized intervention. It is a parent-assisted program. So the way that it originally developed was we have a parent and a teen group that meet at the same time, different rooms, and we're teaching teens about making and keeping friends, using kind of these ecologically valid skills, which I'll describe later, but those are basically the skills that, again, kids who are socially accepted are naturally exhibiting. We're going to teach those. And then down the hall, we're going to teach the parents about these skills and also how to coach their kids so they're actually using these skills. And then we're going to give them homework assignments and do all kinds of things to kind of generalize these skills to another setting. The program started as a 12-week curriculum that expanded to a 14-week curriculum, and they're 90-minute weekly sessions. And it's specifically designed for teens in middle school and high school. A lot of people ask about the age range. Age isn't so relevant, it's the setting. It's your context. Middle school, high school, that's very different than elementary school. All right, and again, this is really designed for kids who are high functioning, so that have an average to above average intelligence. All right, we tried to develop the program using effective methods of social skills instruction. If you look at the literature, there are certain components that you must have in order to have an effective intervention, and these are the components. You need to have a small group format, typically like 7 to 10 kids in this kind of setting, although we've done this in the classroom with larger groups of kids. Why would you want to teach social skills in a small group format? Right, I mean, there's so many people in the community trying to do social skills training and individual therapy. And, you know, I'm sorry, I like to think I have good social skills, but me training a 16-year-old, you know, that's not going to be very ecologically valid, right? They need to learn how to interact with their peers and practice with their peers. So small group format, very, very important. Also those concurrent parent sessions, we need to teach parents how to be social coaches to their kids. We also know that parents can be very helpful in expanding the social opportunities for their kids. We said, remember that our teens are pretty socially isolated. They're not involved in extracurricular activities and clubs and social hobbies. But parents can have a big impact on that. And parents often do, except that they're signing them up for things like karate when they're not interested in martial arts, or in swimming lessons because they don't want them to drown, but they don't necessarily have any interest in swimming. So again, we have to find the right extracurricular activities. Doesn't mean you don't take them to swimming class or teach them karate, but they need to have other opportunities to expand their social network. We also know that, again, parents provide this great social coaching opportunity. But do you think parents often do give advice, right, on social skills? Do they always give the right advice, though? No. Do teachers always give the right advice? No. The thing is, I'm going to talk to you about what some of these ecologically valid skills are, and you're going to see that we all make mistakes in this area. We all have given the wrong advice from time to time because we think we know what works best, but when you look at what kids who are socially accepted are doing, it's not necessarily intuitive. All right, another important element of teaching social skills is didactic instruction. That's having a lesson. You would be shocked at how many social skills programs do not have lessons. There's sort of drop-in groups where you talk about your week and you talk about how things are going socially and you troubleshoot any problems. But what the difficulty with this is that you're not necessarily giving your kids a core set of skills that they need to develop and maintain friendships. And so we need these structured lessons, very important. It's not that those drop-in groups aren't important. Those process groups are important, but you also need to give them the skills that they need. We need to teach these lessons and these skills using those very concrete rules and steps because we know that that's how our kids think. We also want to use what we call a Socratic method of instruction. I'm not going to stand up in front of a group of kids and lecture to them, even if I am using concrete rules and steps. How interesting is that going to be for them? That's going to be really boring. So instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a series of role plays where I might say, okay, watch this, tell me what I'm doing wrong. And let's say I'm talking to Erica. We're going to do a little role play. And I'm just basically talking at her. And I'm just telling her all about my week and this new video game that I got, this new Harry Potter video that I got, and all these different things that are of interest to me. And I'm never letting Erica talk. I'll time out on that and I'll say, okay, so tell me, what did I do wrong? Do you think our kids could tell me what I did wrong? They actually can. You never let her talk. And I said, that's right. I was being a conversation hog. And then I write on the board, one of the rules for having a two-way conversation is don't be a conversation hog. Okay, did I just tell them that? Did I just generate that rule, or did they? They generated that rule through that role play. Okay, that's very important. You think they're more likely to buy into this rule? yes, if they or their peer generates the rules and the steps, they're much more likely to buy into it and actually to remember and retain all of that. And so that's very important. You want the Socratic method of instruction. If I can't do a role play, I might actually present the rule, but then I'm going to ask them why that's important. I might say, for example, one of the rules for having a two-way conversation is don't be repetitive. And we know that's a big problem for our kids. And I'll say, let's say I find out when I'm trading information with Erica that we both like video games. What would be the problem with every single time I see Erica, I go up and start talking about video games? Every single time I see her, I'm going to start talking about video games. What would be the problem with that? It's boring for the other person, right? Even though Erica likes video games, after a while, it's like, oh my God, here comes Liz. All she wants to do is talk about video games. Boring. Okay, our kids can get that, but I'm going to have them generate the rationale for why that's a rule. That's a Socratic method. That's critical. Okay, from there, again, role-playing demonstration is very important. I'm not only going to demonstrate what not to do by coming up with rules and steps, but I'm also going to, of course, demonstrate what to do. And I want them to see what it looks like to have a good two-way conversation where you trade information back and forth and you find a common interest. That's not enough, though. Then they have to have the opportunity to practice that newly learned skill. That's where the behavioral rehearsal comes in. So in that setting, I'm going to now have them practice having a conversation with one another with the goal to find a common interest with the person they're talking to. And are they going to get it right the first time? Or is it going to be perfect? Probably not. And so I'm going to coach them. I'm going to give them coaching with performance feedback. Very important. Is that enough? Absolutely not. They need to actually practice this outside of my group. This is where the homework assignments come in. Now, if I give them a homework assignment to, let's say, call someone on the phone and trade information and find some common interests, can I guarantee that they're all going to do it? No, right? Who do they need help from? Their parents, right? So this is where the parent involvement comes in. So very important. Those are the critical elements to teaching social skills, no matter what the skills are that you happen to be teaching. All right, so just to give you a very quick overview of the peers treatment sessions. We begin the intervention talking about conversational skills. We know that social communication is a big problem for our kids. We're going to start there. And we also know that this is pretty fundamental. This is a critical skill needed in adolescence. So we teach them to trade information back and forth. We teach them to find common interests. That is their goal. And the thing is, our kids are really rule-driven. Have you noticed that? They love rules. And they'll tell you if you break rules, too. They love to police everybody and tell everyone they're breaking rules. But if we give them the rule that the goal of having a conversation is to find a common interest, you would be surprised at how quickly that conversation changes. The style of that conversation changes very rapidly because, again, these are high-functioning kids. It's not that they don't know how to converse. It's that they're making a lot of errors in their conversational patterns. They tend to be one-sided. But if we give them this new goal, you're going to trade information back and forth, you're going to find a common interest. They take that rule very seriously, and they find that common interest very quickly. So it changes the conversational pattern pretty rapidly. We also from there talk about electronic communication. So this would be things like text messaging, instant messaging, email, being online. What do you think is the most common form of electronic communication for adolescents? Texting, for sure. And they really rely on that. So do you think they're really good at making phone calls, for example? Oh my goodness, they avoid phone calls like you wouldn't believe it. Because it involves, it's usually the beginning and the ending of the phone call that they really struggle with. Those transitional kinds of periods and conversations, they really struggle with those things. But we need to give them those skills. There's no excuse. They need to know how to do these kinds of things. They also need to know how to be safe when they're online. And, you know, they're often easily victimized and exploited. We need to help them with that. We also need to teach them how to deal with things like cyberbullying. Now, a lot of our kids, surprisingly, are not on social networking sites like Facebook and things like that, and a lot of them aren't actually experiencing that cyberbullying. However, one of the things that we're finding is that as they go through our program and they become more socially savvy, they start to develop friendships, and they do get on these social networking sites like Facebook, and we need to have them prepared for how to deal with those things and be safe. We also know that our kids are very socially isolated a lot of times for various reasons, and they don't typically have a peer group. Okay, remember I talked about all those peer groups, there's the jocks and the geeks and the nerds and all of that. So we need to talk about not just what those peer groups are, but what the function of those peer groups are. And we know the function is that that's where you find your friends. You know, what do all the jocks have in common? Sports, right. What do all the computer geeks have in common? What do all the gamers have in common? Video games, right. So the thing is, you have to think about what are my interests, and then which peer group might I fit in with based on my interests. And then also, how do I assess if I'm accepted by this group or not? There's all kinds of different steps involved with that. But we need to break this down for our kids, break down the social landscape, and help them identify these peer groups. Because now that we're working on their social skills, we have to actually find a source of friends. And part of that involves those extracurricular activities where the parents are helping to get them enrolled. From there, we get into appropriate use of humor. Okay, this was actually a lesson that we added in our second randomized controlled trial. It was not part of our first study. And the thing was, is what we found that there was this little subset of kids in our group that they thought they were like the funniest joke tellers on the planet, but nobody else was laughing. And they didn't notice. And so we had to teach them how to pay attention to their humor feedback and think about whether they should be more of a joke teller or a joke receiver. And then we, of course, they don't buy it right away. So of course, parent involvement, very important. Parents can provide humor feedback. And a lot of times though, what do parents do? They make a mistake around this weird sense of humor. What will they do? Their kid cracks a weird joke and they laugh at it, right? They give a courtesy laugh. That's their kid, you don't want to make them feel bad, but you're kind of doing them a disservice in a sense because everybody else is laughing at them, not with them. So we need to actually work on that for the subset of kids. And the thing about that subset was those kids could master all the skills we were teaching them, but if they still have that problem with humor, forget it. Humor is one of the fastest ways to push people away. Just think about it. You met someone at a cocktail party or a conference and they cracked a bad joke. Ooh, you were done. Especially if it was an inappropriate joke. Really done fast. And you don't really give them another chance. That's happening with our kids. Okay, we also know that our kids really struggle with peer entry strategies. How do you go up to a group of kids who are talking and join their conversation? I'm going to teach you the ecologically valid skill for this. It's really interesting. I so want to do it now, but I'm going to hold off. I'm going to teach you in a second. All right, we also teach them peer exit strategies. So how do you, once you enter a conversation, if you're not accepted, how do you exit the conversation appropriately? Get-togethers, very, very important for adolescents. Most of our adolescents are still calling these play dates. Do you call play dates, are they play dates when you're a teenager? Okay, no, they're not. And some parents still call them play dates. They haven't gotten to the next stage. So we got to educate them about these things. So get-togethers, very important because we know this is how close, meaningful friendships are developed. You may be friends with someone at school that maybe you sit next to them at lunch or you sit next to them at class, but if you're not having get-togethers with them outside of school, you're not close friends. Okay, so we need to teach them how to have get-togethers and to organize these get-togethers on their own. Play dates, it's fine. Your parents can organize the play date. Are parents supposed to be organizing get-togethers? No, absolutely not. That's not appropriate. So we have to work on that with them. Okay, we know a lot of our kids are into gaming. We need to teach them how to be good sports. Do you think this is intuitive to our kids to be good sports? Not usually, but it's not that difficult to be a good sport. Give a little praise, say, good job, nice try. Not that complicated. Most often what our kids do around sportsmanship is that there are these little referees. Okay, can you imagine? So they're playing games, they're refereeing the other kids, they're telling them what they're doing wrong. Is that fun for other kids? No, absolutely not. So we have a no refereeing rule for being a good sport. And again, remember, our kids are rule driven. If they know the rule is don't be a referee, all of a sudden they're following the rule. It's amazing. Okay, so then we also have another rule about that. It's called the no coaching rule. We discovered that there was this little subset of kids that even though we had this no refereeing rule, they thought they were being helpful. They were like little professors. They always want to be teaching people things, and so they might be playing video games with someone, and they'll kind of grab the control and say, oh, I know how to get to the next level. Here, let me show you. And then the other kids left out for the next hour. So again, this is the no coaching rule, a little bit different than no refereeing. You see how we're taking common social errors that our kids make and turning them into rules. Okay, it's not that there's research out there that says that you shouldn't be a referee or you shouldn't be a coach. It's that we know that those are the mistakes that our kids make, so we also have to develop rules around that. All right, from there we spend the latter part of the intervention really focusing on peer rejection and peer conflict. So this is how do you handle teasing, how do you handle bullying, how do you change a bad reputation. This is not easy to do, but there are actually steps to do it. We also talk about how to handle those arguments and disagreements with friends. We know they're going to come up. Rumors and gossip. As our kids become more socially savvy and start to develop friendships, that could be a problem. Handling rumors and gossip, not easy to do, really fascinating research that actually shows what's most effective. I wish I could tell you all of this stuff, but we'll just share a little bit. All right, and then we end the intervention with a graduation party and a ceremony, and we kind of make it this really exciting thing where they've accomplished a great deal, which they have. All right, I promised you ecologically valid skills. All right, so remember, these are the skills that kids who are socially accepted are naturally doing. Let me ask you a question before I go over all these steps. Okay, imagine that you're at a party with a teenager, and there's all these kids, and they don't know anybody, and you either want to meet people or you want them to meet somewhere. What advice do you think that most adults will give kids in that situation? Be yourself. Okay, nobody say that. But you want them to meet these other kids, so what do you say, or what would someone say? Go up and introduce yourself. That's what most adults, and when I ask kids this in every group, they always say, go up and introduce yourself. Could you imagine? Okay, you got a group of teens, and you walk up, hi, I'm Liz, in the middle of the conversation. Does anybody want to talk to me? Did I just interrupt their conversation? Yeah, I mean, they're going to laugh at me. Okay, that's not how you do it. We're very well-intentioned. We want them to go up and introduce themselves and meet these kids, but that's not how it's done. This is how it's done. Okay, we call this peer entry. What you do, and you can all do this yourselves. You're in a conference. You probably don't know everyone in this room, so feel free to use this skill during the break at lunchtime. This works. You kind of watch and listen to the conversation. What are we listening for? We're listening for the topic. What are they talking about? You actually are watching for minutes. It's very helpful if you have a prop, like a cell phone or something, a BlackBerry, really, really handy. This isn't a BlackBerry. This would be weird if I was looking at a clicker. But if this were a BlackBerry, that would be a good prop. But you're looking kind of from a distance. You're not staring at them, though. Just kind of periodic eye contact. And you figure out what they're talking about, and you figure out if you have anything to contribute to that conversation. Do you have a common interest? Okay? Let's say you do. Then what you do is you move a little bit closer. You wait for a pause in the conversation, and then you join by making a comment or asking a question that's on topic. Do you think our kids do this naturally? No. They go up and they're intrusive, right? They go and they change the subject, or maybe they go up and introduce themselves, or they start talking about some video game, or who knows. But they're not necessarily doing this. But these are very concrete steps. Do you see how this works? I mean, basically the steps are you watch and listen, wait for a pause, and then you join by making a comment or asking a question that's on topic. We also teach them how to assess interest and all of that, but you see that if we can break this skill down into very concrete steps, they actually have a shot at doing it. This is a very complicated social behavior, and it's not easy. I mean, I know how to do this, but that doesn't mean I like doing it when I'm at a conference and I don't know anyone, and I mean, it's intimidating. But if you know how to do this, you have a better shot at being accepted into that conversation. And of course, they have to learn how to assess whether they've been accepted. So how do you know if you've been accepted? Well, there's three basic things. If you've been accepted into a conversation, they're looking at you, they're facing you, and they're talking to you. And we talk about it as they open the circle. When people talk in groups, you ever notice they kind of talk in a circle? What do they do with that circle? If they accept you, they open that circle, right? What do they do if they don't accept you? They close that circle. They give you the cold shoulder, right? So these are the concrete behaviors that we can teach our kids so that they have trouble with social cues. You can break it down to very concrete cues for them, then they can actually understand what's going on. All right, another really, really common mistake that adults make relates to teasing. What do most adults tell kids to do in response to teasing? Ignore it, walk away. I've heard those already. Tell a teacher, tell an adult. Very good, that was quick, okay? Every single group I ask the kids, those are the three things they always say. Ignore, walk away, tell an adult. Then I ask them, does it actually work? And what do you think they say? No. And I say, you know what, you're right, it doesn't tend to work that much sometimes, but usually doesn't work that well. I'm not going to tell you to do that. And they're shocked. It's like they sit up in their chair, all of a sudden, they're shocked that there's an adult that's not going to be teaching them to do that. Because it's not an ecologically valid skill. Kids who are socially accepted, they get teased. Every teenager gets teased. It's how you react to it that determines how often you're teased and in what way you're teased. So kids who are socially accepted, they do this little thing. They act like what the person said didn't really bother them. And then actually what the person said was kind of stupid or kind of lame. Okay, and they'll give a short little comeback that shows that what the person said didn't bother them. They'll say, whatever, or anyway, and your point is, am I supposed to care? Is that supposed to be funny? That works pretty well. How does that make the person who's teasing you feel? Is that fun for them? No, in fact, it kind of embarrasses them. Okay, that's what you want. You want it to be embarrassing for them because they're less likely to tease you next time. These are basic little comebacks that our kids can learn quickly. And then, but again, to replace those strategies that aren't working so well. This is an ecologically valid skill. This is what we should be doing. This is what we should be teaching our kids. And everybody needs to be on board. Parents need to be on board. I can tell kids to do this, but if their parent is telling them to walk away, ignore, or tell an adult, they're going to be pretty confused about what to do. Same if their teacher is telling them to do that. We need to know what these ecologically valid skills are and teach these to our kids and reinforce from all different angles. Okay, another important ecologically valid skill relates to bullying. Now in peers, we talk about teasing and bullying as being two different things. It's not that they are, it's just that our kids think very concretely, and so we need to give them very concrete strategies for handling verbal teasing versus physical bullying. Okay, physical bullying would be kids are, hitting you, kicking you, pushing you, anything like that, anything physical. What would be the problem with using those teasing comebacks, like whatever, to someone who gets physical? They're going to get physical. Yes, absolutely. So we have to teach them we do not use that with people who get physical because they're going to hit us or do something to us. Instead, these are the strategies that we use. Now, what do you think, again, what do most adults tell kids to do in response to physical bullying? Tell a teacher, tell an adult. Okay, not that that's a bad strategy. It's just that imagine that this is a kid who's getting shoved in the hallway or tripped, and that's physical. And then they go tell a teacher, what's going to happen? You're a tattletale, and what's that kid going to do to you? They're going to retaliate, and now you're really in for it, right? So that's not always the best first strategy. But that's the strategy that we usually give them to tell an adult. There's actually some other things that they can do even before that. One is just avoid that bully. If you know the bully has a locker in a certain hallway, try not to walk down that hallway. If you know they sit in a certain area of the lunchroom, don't go in that area. You avoid them. Don't provoke them, so don't use those teasing comebacks with them. Don't try to, tease them or criticize them, make fun of them. And also, don't tell on them for minor offenses. This is a huge problem that our kids have. Remember I said they're policing everybody? They see rule violations and they're calling people out on it. That's not their business. They need to stay out of other people's business, worry about themselves. And you're not going to want to tell on bullies for little small offenses. Now, if the bully brings a weapon to school, is that different? Yes. So again, we have to be concrete with our kids. So should they tell an adult in that case? Yes. But do they do that in front of everybody? No. What do they do instead? They do it in private. They tell the teacher or the principal or whoever in private. And do they go tell their friends that they did that? No. We have to break this down for our kids. They need to know these strategies. Okay, another thing, they shouldn't try to make friends with these bullies. That's a very common mistake our kids make. They think they can win over the bully, and they end up getting, if anything, exploited or maybe beat up even more. It's awful. But they try to make friends with the bully, win them over with their charm and wit, and really all that they're doing is they're just drawing attention to themselves, and they're making it worse for themselves. Okay, who do bullies like to pick on? Kids who are by themselves or in a group. The ones that are by themselves. So a very simple strategy, a very effective strategy is hang out with other kids. Walk to class with other kids, sit next to other kids at lunch. Even if you have to fake like you're friends with them, better to be hanging out with other kids than to be alone, because you're an easy target for the bully when you're alone and you don't have anyone there that could potentially have your back. You can also hang out near adults when the bully is around. That's very helpful. And then of course, if you're in danger, get help from an adult. Absolutely. But that's not always the best first strategy unless you're in danger. So those are some examples of ecologically valid skills. What I want to do now is just take a moment to actually show you what this program looks like. So we have a really nice story that was done by NBC about a year or so ago that I think actually shows you all the different elements kind of nicely, so you can get a visual of what these groups might look like.
Live from NBC4, this is the Channel 4 News at 5.
1 in 150 children born in the U.S. has autism. What happens now when all of these children grow up to be teenagers? There's a new program out there now in Southern California that helps them adjust to life in middle school and then beyond. Dr. Bruce Hensel is here now with that story. Bruce?
That's right, Colleen, and it is Autism Awareness Month, the last day. Teenage years, of course, are when kids start to form social circles and learn to become independent. This special class focuses on coping and making life richer for high-functioning autistic teens and their families during this crucial time. This is no ordinary teenage get-together. It's actually a serious lesson on social skills for autistic kids, and it's part of a unique program at UCLA called Peers.
How do you have a successful get-together with someone? How do you go up to a group of teens and join their conversation? And unfortunately, our kids with autism, they're a little bit more challenged in that area, and they don't naturally understand these social cues.
Actor Gary Cole and his wife Teddy worried about their daughter Mary transitioning into middle school.
When they're small, you can pick up the phone, you can control, in a way, a social life for your child. As they get older, you can't do it.
So they brought her to Peers, where autistic teens get concrete rules on social etiquette, specific steps they can take in certain social situations, and the opportunity to practice.
Are they trying to get a reaction out of you when they tease you? I'm going to give you some new strategies tonight to trouble that aren't going to make them want to retaliate against you, okay? Now here's the thing, this is how you act like what they said didn't bother you. You give them a little comeback that tells them what they said was kind of lame. You say something like, whatever. So what? Big deal. Who cares? Okay, so let's try this again. Man, those shoes are ugly. When? I'm serious, those are some really ugly shoes.
Yeah, and
Those are some ugly shoes.
who cares?
Okay, very good. Round of applause for Mary. Well done.
What I like about it is they're there to help you, and it's helped me more get into conversations and have more things to do.
While the class is going on, the parents are being coached in the next room, learning to assist their teens in making and keeping friends.
What we're going to talk about is what they're going to learn today.
Mary has been putting what she's learned into practice, and friends have noticed.
In school, she wouldn't really talk to a lot of people, but now I see her getting more involved with like a lot more people.
Well, I hung out with my friends, Cody and Sarah. I like felt more open, like I got to see the outside world.
And you can see here, now results of testing shows that teens who have been through the program, Peers program, after 14 weeks, are having many more get-togethers and far more peer interactions with their friends outside of school. Now for information like this, right on your phone, text the word.
Okay, so hopefully that gives you a little glimpse of sort of what the program looks like. This has been taught as an outpatient program, parent-assisted program, for many, many years. I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the current research directions and then also include the classroom actually using a teacher-facilitated model. But that would be a nice example of our parent-assisted model. So I'm just going to very briefly share some research data with you that kind of shows the effectiveness of this program. This is a randomized control trial that we conducted with about 28 participants, a study that we did before that had 33, and believe it or not, those are the largest clinical trials of their kind with this population, teaching social skills. Kind of shocking, right? Not okay. Next, you should probably be investing more of our research dollars in this kind of intervention. It's not that we don't want to have large clinical trials, it's just tell that to NIH and people who fund those kinds of things. All right, so what we did was we looked at an active treatment, we looked at our treatment group Peers in comparison to a waitlist control group. And then what we did that was a little bit unique was that we actually did a 14-week follow-up with our treatment group. Everyone in the study was in the study for 28 weeks, but those in our treatment group received the intervention immediately, then waited for 14 weeks, and then came back and wanted to assess how they were doing about 3.5 months after the intervention. Whereas our waitlist group, they waited for the intervention first, and we kind of compared how they were doing compared to the treatment group. In terms of just basic demographics, both of the groups were equivalent across age and gender, ethnicity, all of that. Mostly male, average age was around 14. Most of our kids were mainstreamed in general education settings, but there were some that were in special ed settings and pull-out classes.
And then average IQ on the K-bit 2 there, but what's interesting is that even though a lot of these kids had average IQ, when we look at their adaptive functioning on a measure called the Vineland Adaptive Behavior Scale, significantly delayed. And that's, we see that time and time again. What that means is our kids might be of average intelligence, but that does not mean they're functioning at an average rate. Okay, so what did we find? Well, looking at parent reports of social skills, we looked at the social responsiveness scale, and this is a scale that was developed by John Constantino. It's an autism screening questionnaire, and it uses T-scores. T-scores are standard scores. They have a mean of 50 and a standard deviation of 10. And what we looked at here were differences in scores from pre-test to post-test. So this is a mean difference in scores. How many points did they change as a result of the treatment? And in blue here, whoa, hi, I'm back. Okay, in blue, we see the treatment group. And in magenta here, we see the waitlist group. We saw a really significant increase on social responsiveness. 11-point standard score increase. That's an entire, for those of you who know about statistics, it's an entire standard deviation improvement. I would say that's not only statistically significant, that's clinically meaningful. You actually are seeing a demonstrable change in these kids in just 14 weeks. Okay, when you break that down, there's all these different subscales on the social responsiveness scale. What does that look like? Where are the changes being seen? Well, what we see is a very nice improvement in social awareness. Remember, that's kind of understanding the landscape of your social environment. And then also social cognition. That was a surprise to us. Social cognition, hallmark feature of autism, that's theory of mind. Why are we weren't teaching that, we didn't think we were. So why did we see this huge change? Well, we went back and we looked at, well, what are we doing? Okay, remember that role play demonstration I was talking about with Erica where I was being a conversation hog? We asked these questions after those role plays. We say, what do you think that was like for Erica? What do you think Erica thought of me? Do you think Erica's going to want to talk to me again? And then I would ask, Erica, what was that like for you? What did you think of me? And would you want to talk to me again? We now call those social cognition questions because that's essentially what we were doing. We were teaching theory of mind without even really realizing that's what we were doing. And we think that's probably why we saw that change. Okay, we also saw improvements in social communication, which we expected to see. We're working on conversational skills. And also a change in what they call autistic mannerisms. Okay, that one was a surprise too. But then we went, because we were thinking of flapping and like, what are we, we're not working on that. We went back and looked at the items and there were things like perseverating on topics of restricted interest, and so they were things that we were actually targeting. Okay, we also looked at the SSRS, the Social Skills Rating System, and that was a measure that Jan Blacksher mentioned in her talk. It's one of the, you kind of think of it as the gold standard of social skills assessment. It's not really the gold standard, it's just the best we have. And so what we look at here is social skills and problem behaviors. And we saw a very nice improvement in social skills in the treatment group. Now this scale has a mean of 100 and a standard deviation of 15. So we saw almost a standard score increase in social skills as a result. Now the thing that's really remarkable about this is that most social skills training programs, they use the SSRS, but they almost never report standard scores. They report like raw scores and things like that because it's so hard to find a change in standard scores. It's just really hard to find that. And so we were really very excited about that particular finding. When you break that down into the different subscales, this is what you find. Improvement in assertion, so that's just kind of putting yourself out there, kind of being social. Cooperation, so kind of behaving in a cooperative manner with others, and responsibility, that would be kind of like independence. Okay, what we're presenting here are raw scores, and the only reason, I'm not trying to fake you out, the only reason that we have raw scores here is because they don't have standard scores on these subscales. But we see a nice dramatic improvement on the SSRS. We also looked at their social skills knowledge. Did they actually learn what we were teaching them? And they did in fact learn what we were teaching them over here on the task, the test of adolescent social skills knowledge. We also wanted to look at frequency of peer contacts. How often were they actually interacting with other kids having get-togethers? So these are the number of get-togethers in the past month, the frequency of get-togethers. And this was actually the increase or change in number of get-togethers as a result of the intervention. And according to the parent report, teens were having on average 4 additional get-togethers per month in the treatment group, compared to really very little in the waitlist group. That's great. We went and asked the teens about that, and they said, yeah, we're having more get-togethers also, but they were saying, I'm sorry, I did it the wrong way. Teens were saying that they were having 4 additional get-togethers per month. Parents said, yes, they are, but it was about 2.
Okay, well, we were really confused by that, so fortunately, we had our treatment group coming back for the follow-up, and we could actually find out what that was all about. And what we discovered was that teens were having get-togethers that their parents didn't even know about. Okay? How neurotypical is that? I mean, how fantastic is that? That's normal. That's what teens do. They're going to Burger King after school or, just kind of hanging out. Fantastic. That's what we want. And we were surprised by it too. It was great. So then what we wanted to do was, we said, this is great that they're having more get-togethers, but that's part of our program. We're trying to get them to have more get-togethers. So, it's great they're having better social skills, but what happens after the intervention? So we went back 14 weeks with just our treatment group, because remember, everybody was in the study for 28 weeks, so we couldn't go back with our waitlist group, and this is what we found. Okay, high scores, as Dr. Blatcher mentioned on the SRS, are indicative of bad social functioning on the social responsiveness scale. So you want these scores to actually go down. And T1 represents our pre-test, T2 represents our post-test, and T3 is that 14-week follow-up assessment. So you see this nice decrease in social responsiveness on the scale, and again, that's a good thing, and it maintains very nicely at follow-up. And then we see that in the other subscales. Social awareness maintains very nicely at follow-up, social communication, and autistic mannerisms. The only subscale that did not maintain, anyone remember? It was social cognition. The one we were so surprised by, the theory of mind, that did not maintain at follow-up. And I think what that shows, we're not curing autism. That's a hallmark feature of autism, is poor social cognition. But we're not giving up on that, because we think, we didn't teach the parents to coach for social cognition. So in another upcoming study, we're actually going to do that and see if we can maintain that social cognition. We're not giving up that easily. Okay, then we looked at the SSRS, the Social Skills Rating System. And again, here, increased scores are good. On social skills overall, we saw this very nice improvement at post-test, and it maintained very nicely at follow-up. On the assertion scale as well, maintained nicely, cooperation, responsibility. All of that maintained very, very nicely. We're excited about that. But we found this really cool finding that we wouldn't have known about if we hadn't gone back 14 weeks later. What we found was there's this other subscale of the SSRS. It's called problem behaviors. It's kind of like self-control and kind of conflict. We had never seen a change in that as a result of the intervention, but 14 weeks later, coming back, there's this nice decrease in problem behaviors. The kids are able to maintain better self-control. They're externalizing less. They're not acting out as much. We wouldn't have known that if it wasn't for the fact that we went back. And I really think that this speaks to the involvement of parents in the intervention. All of these findings at 14 weeks, I really think are the power of the parents being involved in the intervention, because just because our program is over at 14 weeks doesn't mean that they stop working on these skills. The program continues on because the parents are there. So I think it really speaks, vividly of why you want to include parents or teachers in the intervention. All right, and then just finally, we also looked at frequency of hosted get-togethers, and what we found from the adolescents was that they had that, remember that dramatic increase in frequency of get-togethers at post-test? It went down significantly at follow-up, but it was still almost about 2. It was still significant compared to where they were at when they first came into the program. They were having about 2 additional get-togethers per month. So even though it went down after the intervention, it was still significantly higher than before they ever received the intervention. Same thing with parents, it went down a little bit, but on average, our kids were having about 2 additional get-togethers at the end of the intervention and at the follow-up. And then their social skills knowledge maintained very nicely. Okay, in terms of where we're going with this research, so great to include the parents. We all agree that's a wonderful thing. It's going to definitely improve your outcomes and the long-term findings. But, in some cases, parents can't participate in the intervention, or maybe they're not willing to. So we knew that there was a whole group of kids that were not getting served. And where can we serve them? Well, we can serve them in the classroom. So what we did was we developed a school-based intervention that's teacher-facilitated. And now teachers are teaching peers in the classroom like a class. It's taught 5 days a week for about half an hour a day, and teaching all of those concrete rules and steps of social etiquette. And we've completed 1 clinical trial with that program with very nice findings that I'll be presenting at a conference in San Diego next month for the first time. Very excited about that. Great findings. In our second study, which is currently underway, we've done this very cool thing. We've actually combined teachers and parents in the intervention. So the teachers are teaching the skills in the classroom to the kids. parents are coming to a weekly parent group learning to be social coaches to their kids. That's fantastic. We're really excited about that. Okay, what else are we doing? Well, we've actually adapted this program for young adults. So remember I said there was a huge treatment gap for adolescents? It's even worse for adults. There's virtually nothing out there and definitely not evidence-based treatments. And so what we've done is we've adapted this program for young adults. We've actually done 2 randomized control trials now with that group, and it's looking really, really good. In fact, the findings are almost stronger than our adolescent groups. This is a caregiver-assisted program because these young adults are still rather immature. They still need a lot of support from their families. And so we actually have parents, grandparents, aunts and uncles, you name it, adult siblings involved in the intervention to provide that social coaching. We also done what I think is one of the most exciting studies so far. We've done a 1 to 5 year follow-up on all these kids that have gone through the program. And we actually got 64% of them to come back for this follow-up study, which is really, really high. And I think it's just because our families get really attached to us. They don't like, they hang around and stay in touch. And so 1 to 5 years post-treatment, we've gone back to see, well, what are the maintenance of these treatment gains? And they look really, really good. We actually just analyzed the data last week for this conference in San Diego, and I'm so excited to share the data. I can't share it now, but if you come talk to me later, I'll maybe just kind of secretly tell you. Okay, and then finally, we're doing an fMRI study. So fMRI is functional magnetic resonance imaging. So that's scanning the brain. And what we're doing is we're actually doing a pre-post test or study of kids who've gone through the program with brain scans. We're scanning their brains before the intervention and after to see how the neural pathways change. And specifically, we're looking at things like peer rejection. So there's this paradigm, this behavioral paradigm, it's called cyberball. And what you do is you put the kids in the scanner, they've got virtual reality goggles on, and they think that they're playing catch with 2 other kids in scanners in the building. Okay, they're passing the ball, they're playing catch. Okay, well really they're not. We just fake that, and it's a simulated thing. And what happens is at some point, the other 2 kids in the scanner, they stop passing the ball to our kid. So we simulate peer rejection, and we see what lights up in the brain. And we do that pre-test and post-test. Do you think we talk about cyberball and catch and peers? No, but we want to see how do the neural pathways change as a result of this program in relation to things like experiencing peer rejection. So I think that's a really cool study as well. Okay, so this is the shameless plug, and then I'll let you guys go to lunch. Okay, so this is the manual, our peers manual. It's been out for about a year now. It was published by Rutledge. We do have manuals available outside of the room. On the right-hand side, there's a table. I think our 2 research assistants are here, Erin Kornak and Sienna Whittam over here in the corner. They'd be happy to answer any questions you have about that. But we actually have provided a 20% conference discount if you guys are interested. This is all manualized like a curriculum and used in the classroom. This is more of an after-school type program. This would be more appropriate for. However, if you're interested in the school-based curriculum that's a daily class, we do have a school manual. We're currently publishing that with Rutledge. I'm not able to actually give that out except at our peers training seminars. We have peers training seminars at UCLA 3 times a year. They're 4-day trainings for 20 hours. You get to see live demonstrations of the groups. And we also do lots of role plays. We have videos that we show, and we basically get you ready to go so you know how to do this intervention. It's not that easy to follow a manual all the time, but it sometimes can be helpful to actually have this kind of intensive training. As part of that training, we do provide the school manual. I made a deal with Rutledge. They have to let me give out that manual at that training. So that's one way to access that. Otherwise, just stay posted, stay in contact with us, and we can let you know when that school manual is actually available. So I think I got to wrap up at this point, but I want to thank you all so much for your attention. I want to thank our amazing team, and enjoy your lunch.